Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Welcome to the messengers in our home. Dear Kardec Radio listeners, welcome to the messengers in our home. My name is Franziska Kranz.
And I am Mackenzie Mello.
So tonight we're going to talk about Vicente's story, chapter 4 of the book The Messengers by Andre Lewis through the psychography of Chic Xavier. Hello Mackenzie.
Hi Franziska, and hello everyone. Welcome back to another chapter of The Messengers in our home.
So welcome back again, dear listeners of Kardec Radio. We are so delighted to keep studying with you. And before we get into today's session, I would like to invite you for our opening prayer. Dear Mother, Father God, Creator of the universe and of our yet small hearts, we are here united in your name, with our hearts full of gratitude, to thank you for the gift of life and for all the opportunities we have to learn to grow. We thank you for our continuous learning with Andre Lewis here through our studies on Kardec Radio, and would like to ask you to give us the strength and the courage to keep on going in our own evolutionary process. Step by step, day by day, making an effort to evolve on an intellectual and moral level. Thank you so much, dear good spirits, for your assistance, for your guidance. And once again, we ask you to inspire us so that we can understand tonight's teaching in the best possible way and put them into practice in our daily life. So be it. Let us now listen to the reading of chapter 4. Enjoy.
Chapter 4. Vicente's Story. I couldn't possibly express how happy I was with my newfound friendship. Vicente had a very peaceful-looking face. It displayed an expression of intelligence and lucidity, and radiated affection and goodness, sensitivity and understanding. He told me he was overjoyed at having found a fellow physician, and in a show of great fraternal kindness, he arranged a room for me conveniently close to his. He was my first colleague from my old profession. He too had recently arrived from the spheres of earth, and he was the first with whom I felt a more direct connection. We freely exchanged ideas about the surprises that we had encountered since our arrival. We talked about the problems resulting from worldly misconceptions, the myopia of the planet's limited medicinal science, and the profound and fascinating issues surrounding spirit medicine. Although Vicente had not yet made any visits to the incarnate plane in a service capacity, he had an extraordinary admiration for Aniceto, and brought me up to date on the invaluable studies they had delved into together. He was full of enthusiastic ideas. In a little over an hour, our friendship had become like the sentiment of two brothers who had been united by spiritual ties for a long, long time. My new companion had won my boundless trust. Displaying great tact, he asked about my situation regarding my family, and I responded with a brief account of my unusual experience when I had learned of my widow's second marriage. I told my story as explicitly as possible and became quite emotional. With each culminating particular of what had occurred, I intentionally slowed down my account, emphasizing my former sufferings and relating seemingly insurmountable adversities. Vicente smiled now and then as he listened in silence. When I finished my moving account, he placed his right hand on my shoulder and said, "You mustn't think you were unfortunate and misunderstood. You should realize, my dear Andre, that you were actually quite fortunate." "What do you mean?" "Your Zelia respected you as a husband to the last of your days, and a second marriage is not at all surprising in such circumstances. In my case, however, things were much worse." Given my understandable surprise, my new friend continued, "Let me explain." He thought for a few seconds, as if he were putting his memories in order, and then proceeded. "You can't imagine how intense a dream of love my marriage was. Soon after receiving my professional diploma at age 25, I married Rosalinda. I was radiant with happiness. I brought my wife not only into a comfortable and secure financial situation, but also into the treasures of my love and devotion. My happiness knew no bounds. In a short time, 2 little children enriched our happy home. My sense of well-being was inexpressible. Because of my bank reserves, I didn't have to specialize in clinical work, but devote myself passionately to the laboratory instead. Because of my propensity for that type of work, it wasn't long before I gained the trust of many colleagues in various study centers, which resulted in increased research opportunities and glowing results. Rosalinda was my primary and most capable co-worker. From time to time, she got bored handling test tubes, but she was able to repress such little annoyances for the sake of our domestic happiness. She seemed to understand me completely. In my eyes, she was a dedicated mother and a flawless wife. Well, 10 years of conjugal bliss had passed when my brother Eleuterio, an unmarried lawyer, somewhat older than myself, decided to settle close by. Rosalinda went out of her way to be attentive to him since he was a member of my family. Eleuterio came into our home as a true brother. Although he actually roomed in a hotel, he took part in our evenings at home and was always charming and eager to please. From that time on, though, I noticed that my wife began to change little by little. She demanded that I hire an assistant to replace her at work, claiming that our little ones needed more dedicated maternal attention. I happily consented. After all, it was an arrangement that was important for our children's welfare. However, Rosalinda's transformation started to become more noticeable. She began to avoid the laboratory altogether, where we had happily embraced so many times after seeing our most important experiments crowned with success. She preferred to go to the cinema or shopping with Eleuterio. I was greatly saddened by this, but I had no reason to doubt my brother's behavior. He had always been considerate at home, although he was overbearing and egotistical in his professional life. My home life, which had always been so happy, had now become one of rather bitter loneliness, which I tried to evade with persistent, honest work. Things continued like that when an odd transformation altered my life. A small pustule in one of my nostrils had never given me any trouble, but after I injured it slightly, it turned into an extremely serious condition. In just a few hours, it broke out in septicemia. My colleagues gathered around my sickbed in a veritable assembly. However, all their care was useless. Their best attempts at helping me were completely useless, and I realized that my end was rapidly approaching. Rosalinda and Eleuterio appeared to be grief-stricken, and even now I can see their looks of dismay at the moment when the mist of death shrouded my corporeal eyes. At this point, Vicente remained quiet for a long while, as if focusing on his most painful memories. Then he continued, less enthusiastically. After a period of pitiful troubles in the lower zones, and after I had recovered in No Solar, I discovered the whole truth. Upon returning to my home, I was in for a big surprise. Rosalinda was now married to Eleuterio. "Our stories are almost identical," I exclaimed. "Not really," he protested with a smile. And he continued, "Another surprise rent my heart. Only when I returned to my home did I learn that I had been the victim of a hateful crime. My own brother had devised the deviously wicked plot. My wife and he had fallen hopelessly in love and had yielded to the temptations of the flesh. Divorce was not legal. Even if the law had allowed it, it would have been scandalous for Rosalinda to leave me to publicly live with her brother-in-law. However, Eleuterio remembered that she and I had worked in the laboratory together, and he suggested that she infect me with a certain microbial culture which he took upon himself to obtain as soon as possible. My poor wife wasted no time, and, taking the opportunity while I was asleep, she injected the deadly virus into the tiny, slightly opened pustule. And that's my story in a nutshell." I was dumbstruck. "And those two criminals?" I asked. Vicente smiled slightly and said, "Rosalinda and Eleuterio are apparently living together quite happily. They are dedicated materialists and are enjoying their great fortune and high social standing in the transitory world." "But what about justice?" I inquired. "Look, Andre," he calmly explained, "everything comes in its time, the good as well as the bad. First the seed, then the fruit." Noticing how sad I looked, Vicente concluded, "Let's not talk about this anymore. It's almost time for class. Let's attend to what's really important and help our loved ones still far away in the earthly circles. Don't be too concerned. In order to produce fruit, the tree doesn't complain about its dead leaves. For us, at this time, my friend, evil is the mere result of ignorance and nothing more." This chapter is very interesting. Well, I know that I keep repeating that these chapters are very interesting. This one, though, it is interesting for, at least on my view, for a different reason. Andre usually talks to spirits in most of the chapters. They are somewhat a little more evolved morally and spiritually than he is. In this chapter, though, we're going to hear a story of a spirit that is somewhat at the same level as Andre. We're going to be able to recognize some things in common that this spirit, Vicente, has with Andre. And more specifically, as we already heard the reading of the chapter, some similarities in their stories. And it all starts by the similarity of professions, as we already learned on last week's chapter number 3, when they first met at the Messenger Center. And they met because Aniceto presented them to one another. Andre starts the chapter by saying that he wouldn't know how to express his happiness when he found his new friend with this new friendship, and then he goes to describe Vicente a little bit, saying that he is intelligent, he is very lucid, he radiates affection and goodness, little sensitivity and understanding, but also that he has a very peaceful looking face. Once we stop and look a little bit into the history of the name Vicente, we're going to find that the name Vicente means to conquer. It came from Latin and from the Romans, and a lot of early Christians had this name. At least that's what histories tell us. And if the name means to conquer, it is interesting for us to reflect on Vicente's story as a story of trying to conquer in something for himself, or even to some degree to conquer himself, right? To be able to go through problems and overcome these problems. Right now, as he is showing, or at least to Andre's perception of himself, of Vicente, he's showing a very peaceful looking face, meaning that he was, at this moment, was already able to conquer something over what he has gone through. And once again, since we already know what it is, now it's easy for us to go back a little bit and reflect upon why he has this very peaceful looking face, as Andre is describing to us. However, we need to understand, and maybe that's one of the big lessons, or what I can take from this chapter, is how hard it is and how hard it can be for an individual to overcome these problems. It is very common for us, because if you take the reading of this chapter, for example, we read a chapter like this in about, let's say, 10 to 15 minutes, and we read the whole chapter in this time, right, in 10 to 15 minutes, and we are making comments on a chapter of about 1 hour. It is interesting for us to see that what Vicente is telling here is his story. And Vicente's story didn't last 15 minutes. Vicente's story didn't last 1 hour, which is the time that we're taking to comment and to have this program more or less right on Kardec Radio. It took a lifetime, meaning an earthly lifetime, the time period that he lived while incarnated here on earth, to go through all those problems. Let's say 40 years, 50 years, by his description, maybe no more than that, because of maybe how early he died due to the problems that he faced in his family. He even says at one point, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes, but he even says at one point that he is new to No Solar, basically just like how new Andre is. It's been no more than, let's say, 10 years since he discarnated, since he passed away, and now he's already looking peaceful. But what were the struggles that he had to go through, right, to reach this state? Nevertheless, we need to remember that Vicente is not, at least not to what we can see from what he says in the chapter, a much more evolved spirit than what Andre is or was. Although not just by what he describes, since he's telling his story from his point of view, and that's the only point of view that we have from him, is from him, but because of some of the considerations that he does once he's telling the story, or once he's finalizing the story. And we're going to also talk a little bit about this close to the end of the chapter. But we need to understand that for ourselves to get better spiritually and morally, we need to conquer the territory of our own hearts. We cannot leave our hearts as if it's a wasteland, allowing anything and everything to happen to it without having a control or an overview, or really trying to work very hard on tilling the soil, to use Andre's expression in one of the past chapters that we already talked about. So we need to till the soil of our hearts so that we can as Aniceto was telling Andre earlier on, to become living letters, right, of the Christ, to take the message and do something with the message within ourselves. How can we do this unless we really put effort to conquer ourselves, to look at ourselves and see, hey, I need to conquer this terrain where I left pride grow over it, that I left wrath grow over it. So I need to conquer these terrains and start planting new seeds there so that they can grow and make my heart, make our hearts a better terrain, a better place where new trees are growing. Right after this, Andre tells us that Vicente was overjoyed at having found a fellow physician like himself, and being very, very kind, he already found a new room conveniently close to his. So it is interesting that he is actually trying to become close friends with somebody that he will work with. This is saying to us, correct? How many times we don't make not even a small effort to overcome sometimes some feelings that we have towards a person that we are just meeting, and we don't even try to overcome these first impressions, right? To have a room conveniently close to his room. Not saying that we're going to do this for everybody. It should be part of our tasks to try and to make efforts to become close to our brothers and sisters in humanity, right? Not everybody is going to be all of a sudden loved the same way. But with the understanding that we have right now, we need to remember that everybody, all of us, incarnated and discarnated, we are all daughters and sons of the same Creator, of the same God. Therefore, we are all brothers and sisters. And if Jesus invited us to love our enemies, how much love should we put into the relationships that we are developing with those who are not our enemies, right? And this is a saying that's in one of Andre Luiz's books. He says it differently, but this is what he wants to convey. How much, right, am I doing the same thing that Vicente did to Andre? Once again, I try to, when reading this, put myself in the position of those, of every single person, character that's in the story, not only on the side of receiving something good, but also, and most importantly, on the positions of those who are doing good to others, and asking myself, am I doing something similar to this? Am I trying hard enough to do it? Am I actually doing it? Making an effort to do it. So after arranging this room close to him, Andre continues describing a little bit about Vicente, and he says that he was his first colleague from his old profession. Remember, Andre was a physician while incarnated, and Andre tells us here what we just mentioned, that Vicente had recently arrived from the spheres of Earth, and he was the first with whom Andre felt a more direct connection. Maybe it's because of the profession, maybe it's because of the tastes, the similarity on their stories, that to this point Andre still doesn't recognize or doesn't know what it was. But this connection was already being established at this point. So they freely exchange ideas about what they found, about the surprises that they found once they discarnated, once they arrived there. They talked about problems resulting from worldly misconceptions, our myopia, but especially the myopia of the planet's limited medicinal science, and also on the profound and fascinating issues surrounding spirit medicine. So on that regard, I'd like to invite everybody that's listening to this show to keep your eyes focused and always researching, following Kardec Radio, following some websites of the United States Spiritist Council, or the website of the Spiritist Society of Virginia, of Baltimore, in Florida, anywhere in the United States, and for that matter, anywhere in the world, looking for congresses or symposia that bridge medicine and spirituality. Since we are Spiritists, we also have events around the world and also here in the United States that bridge Spiritism and medicine. And most of them, at least up to this moment, always show the interaction of this series of books that we are studying now, Life in the Spirit Realm by Andre Luiz, and through the psychography of Francisco Cândido Xavier, Chico Xavier, showing how Andre and some of the physicians in these books present the important part that showing how much medicine still has to achieve, because since we usually see our diseases only from the point of view of the heart, only from the point of view of our bodies, and we usually don't take into account, and when we say we, is regular medicine, right, that only sees us as trillions of cells put together with nothing else more than the physical body, how much medicine still has to improve. I just wanted to point this out here because in this paragraph, right, we can use this paragraph as, let's say, not the starting point, because Andre already talked a little bit about this in the first book, No Solar, and he will talk way, way more, not only through this book, but throughout the other books of this series, how much we still have to learn and think about once we start seeing our lives not only as a group of physical organs and cells and blood and tears, and forgetting that we are spirits living a physical experience, right? But continuing, Andre keeps telling a little bit more about Vicente, and he says that Vicente still had not made any visits to the incarnate plane in a service capacity, just like him. If we don't see Andre's first visit to the incarnate plane to visit his family as a service, because it was not, right? He was not trained for this. He was not there being followed and accompanied. It was more like a familial visit so that he could know and learn what was going on. And Vicente is at the same level of Andre, once again, as we said in the beginning. But because Vicente was and is very affectionate and has an extraordinary admiration for Aniceto, he was able to bring Andre up to date into what Vicente and Aniceto were studying together, so that Andre could catch up, right, with what they already started learning. And Vicente was full of ideas. And over this hour that they were talking about, their friendship was growing like the sentiment of two brothers who are united now, but as Andre describes, it is as if they knew each other for a very long time. So he and Vicente now are very good friends. And Vicente won, in Andre's words, his boundless trust. At this moment, when they are really bonding, it is natural that personal stories will start showing up, will start being told, and they're going to start reflecting upon these stories. So Vicente starts and asks about Andre's family. And naturally, Andre tells him his story, which we already know and we don't need to go through, also because Andre doesn't tell much here and we don't need to go to. But Andre describes that he tells the story as explicitly as possible and was very emotional. And at every time that the climax or climaxes were he was getting to those climaxes, he usually and intentionally slowed down his account, emphasizing his former sufferings and relating seemingly insurmountable adversities, as we all do once we are telling our stories. Not saying that it's wrong, not saying that it's right, but he is actually just telling the story of what's going on, emphasizing some parts, not putting too much emphasis on another part, and so on. He describes that Vicente was smiling here and there as he was listening, not making any comments. So once Andre finishes his story, Vicente puts his right hand, as he describes, on Andre's shoulder and says, "Well, Andre, you don't need to think that you were unfortunate and misunderstood. And he says, you should realize, my dear Andre, that you were actually quite fortunate." So for us, who already know Andre's story, we may get what Vicente is telling Andre. But remember, it's the very first time that these two spirits are seeing each other, talking for about an hour, 2 hours, and Vicente already tells him that. So that's for us a very important point to really show what Andre was telling us, that Vicente has won his boundless trust. So the way is open for them to be close and sincere in what they are telling each other. To what Andre asks him, "What do you mean? What do you mean when you say that, okay, with all the story that I told you, how I suffered, what happened to me, what the other spirits did, what my ex-wife did, what his family did, you're telling me that I was fortunate, that I was lucky to have that story?" And Vicente says, "Well, by the story that you told me, your Zilia respected you as a husband to the last of your days, and a second marriage is not at all surprising in these circumstances. You died, right? And she was alone. She needed to raise her family. She found another person and married to him, and so that he could raise them, their kids, and so on." So Andres says, and Vicente finalizes by saying, "Well, in my case, things were much more worse. In my case, things were much worse than your story." Naturally, Andre is surprised, right? And Vicente looks at him and says, "Well, let me explain." He thinks for a few seconds, and he proceeds telling the story as if he was trying to remember the details so that he could tell us the story. And then he tells him of his marriage that was a marriage taken from a dream, how happy he was. And he received his diploma at 25. He married Rosalinda. And by the way, Rosalinda, if we translate it directly, right, it means Rosa, it means rose, close enough. Linda means beautiful, so it's a beautiful rose. So it's to show us how it's a name that invokes in us this expression of beauty, of somebody that's soft, somebody that's very pleasant, right? It's a beautiful thing to look at, and it has its own charm. But naturally, every rose has its thorns, right? Has its thorns. But Vicente doesn't say anything about that. It's this is just me thinking about Rosalinda's name here. And Vicente says that he was radiant with happiness. he says they were very happy. They had 2 children. It was a very happy home. His sense of well-being was inexpressible because of the money that they were able to save. They could, or he could, devote himself passionately to the laboratory instead of having to go to clinic work, which would take much more time of him. And he liked to work, and there was a lot of good friends where he used to work. Rosalinda was a co-worker of himself, and they worked together. Apparently, she was not very fond of the type of work that they were doing, but because of their happy marriage, she was able to overcome these difficulties so that they could be happier when they were together. And she seemed to understand Vicente completely. That was Vicente's perception. And he says, in his eyes, she was a dedicated mother and a flawless wife. It is interesting to notice here how sincere he is being, because he is not saying that she was happy. He is not saying that they had, although I might have said that they had a happy marriage, but he is saying here that his perception of the marriage was that they had a happy marriage, but not that they actually had a happy marriage, right? Because the way he finalizes this paragraph is, she seemed to understand me completely. Of course, he is telling this story on a hindsight, so we already know how the story ends. But at that time, he couldn't see it, so he was blind. And it's also very calling to me the way that he uses his words in this paragraph, because he says, my marriage was, my professional diploma, I was radiant, I brought my wife, right? My sense of well-being, my bank reserves, my propensity for that type of work, right? So he's always using his, my, mine. There's only one time when he says our, is when he talks about our happy home, right? So maybe, and even at this time, this our is his and his 2 children. I'm not saying that he doesn't love her. What I'm saying is that maybe because of the amount of love that he had, and he wasn't able to see that she was not into that situation with him completely as he was for her. Not that she is bad or anything, it's just noticing how our relationships are built and what we are doing and how much we are paying attention to our relationships. So in his eyes, she was a dedicated mother and a flawless wife. And that led them to some kind of degree, because he wasn't able to actually see what was coming to him, what was coming to them. They had 10 years of conjugal bliss. And then his brother, Eleuterio, was a little bit older than himself, decided to settle to live close to where they were living. And Rosalinda started to get distracted by that. Eleuterio came into their house as a true brother. He was not living with them at the same house, but he used to go to their house for evenings and was always there, charming and eager to please. And it is right there when Vicente starts to notice that Rosalinda started to change little by little. she was not going to their work anymore as much as she was in the beginning, because she was saying that their children needed more of her maternal attention. He happily consented. It was important for their children that the mother was together with them. But it was not just that. Rosalinda's transformation started to become more noticeable, he says. She began to avoid the laboratory altogether, where they had happily embraced so many times after they saw how successful their endeavor was going. Started to prefer to go to the cinema or to shop with Eleuterio. By the way, I'd just like to point out here that the word Eleuterio, or the name Eleuterio, also has a very interesting meaning here. It was Latinized from a Greek name which meant free. So it is as if Andre is trying to tell us here that we need to be careful with what freedom brings to us. We keep saying that we need freedom, we need liberty to do what we want to do. It is true, it is necessary. However, we need to also remember that with freedom, always have to put responsibility on its side. Because if we decide to do whatever we please with the freedom that we think that we have, and we don't think about the consequences of our actions, what's going to happen to us later on? And remember, we're not here talking about consequences in this life only. Although it may be, and it may happen on this life already, depending on what types of acts I do using our freedom or our perceived freedom. But also, these actions that we are taking, they will come with us once we die, because any action that I commit here, any deed that I'm attached to, once my body stays back, spirit continue, and everything I did come with me. Everything I did comes with me. So it is not something that I will do and then I will forget it, and okay, I did it in the past and then that's it. If we think like this, we still didn't understand one of the main teachings of Spiritism, of the Spiritist philosophy, which is life goes on, and which is one of the main points of this whole series of Andre Luiz, is to show us that anything and everything that we do has a consequence for ourselves. That's why we need to know ourselves a little more so that we can start changing, so that we can start taking responsibility for the actions that I perform during my lifetime, and to understand that some things that are happening to me right now are the consequences of the liberties that I took in the past, of how well or not well I used my free will in the past. So Eleuterio here comes to show us that it is free, but free doesn't come without responsibility on its side. So we need to really pay attention to how we are behaving. I already mentioned this, but we need to put ourselves into the places of these people, right? Did I already do something like Eleuterio did here? Not to a brother or to a sibling of mine or a sister, or no, to anybody, right? Taking a wife of somebody, and in this case here, even worse, right? Killing these one people to stay with another. We didn't do that, but it is important for us to understand that unfortunately these things still happen. And if we are not doing these things, so much better for ourselves. But once we already know this, what are the types of actions that I am doing with my life that can be similar to this? What will be the consequences of our acts? Know it here, because that's one of the beauties of this chapter, is to allow us to think by ourselves the consequences of these acts. We will see it when we get there. Vicente was greatly saddened by this, he says, but he had no reason to doubt his brother's behavior. He was always a very good person, although sometimes overbearing and egotistical in his professional life. But why would I doubt his reasons? His home life, which was always happy, now was becoming lonely. And since he was not able to get that kind of participation at home that he had before with his wife, he was trading time at home with persistent and honest work. Things continued like that. And then something really strange happened and altered his life. He had a small problem, a small pustule in his nose, but it was never a big problem. But all of a sudden, he had a scratch on it, and it became a very serious condition. In just a few hours, it broke out in septicemia. It spread all over the body. They tried everything, but this care was useless. They tried, but they weren't able to see what it was, what was happening, and what kind of medicine they would need to use to avoid death. And unfortunately, that's what happened. He died. And he describes that once his eyes were being shrouded by death, he saw Rosalinda and Eleuterio grief-stricken. So he saw sadness in their eyes to see Vicente dying. One thing that I'd like to point out here is once we start having a problem at home, at work, in school, there's something that it always happens to us, or I wouldn't say to all of us, but if we are able to some degree to avoid that problem and exchange that problem to go to a place where we don't have a problem, that's usually what we do. And to avoid these problems and trying to find a quiet place where we don't have problems doesn't mean that we solved the problem. And I'm not saying that Vicente would be able to solve the problem. But it is very interesting, and I'm using the word interesting a lot here because, like I said in the beginning, this chapter is different because we're not dealing with a spirit that's highly evolved. We are dealing with a spirit that's somewhat similar to us. He says that once he starts finding his home not as happy as before, he runs from his home to his work, substituting one thing for the other. So, is it going to solve the problem? No. He doesn't tell how much he tried to solve the problem, and maybe that's a problem in itself. Right? He is the one narrating the story here for us. He, to some degree, he gives up. It is as if he is saying, okay, I was able to conquer something, but there was something else that I wasn't able to conquer. How much more effort would he need to do to really change the situation? We don't know. And what we are doing here is not judging Vicente, judging Rosalinda, judging Eleuterio. They did what they wanted to do. They did what their free will allowed them to do. Some choose better. Some chose wrong. And like we were saying, with free will comes responsibility, comes consequence, and they all have the lives that they're living at this very moment. We don't know where they are right now as consequence of what they did in this life or in a previous life, just like what we are feeling and receiving and living right now is a consequence of our actions in the past. And that's the reflection that I want us to have right now, is once again to stop and think, hey, we're talking here about real people. We're talking here about people who had problems and people who had to make choices in their lives, and they all made choices. Vicente made a choice to, once the problems started, he started to feel down, and once more, I don't know how much he put an effort to solve the problem, but he says at the end here that he tried to evade that loneliness that he was feeling at home, going to persistent and honest work. So he was doing something correct on the work side, but what was he doing at the family side? Right? Not to say that the other side, Eleuterio and Rosalinda, were doing the best things, and they were choosing correctly. No, on the contrary. They were the ones who were, let's say, driving this situation that Vicente wasn't able to control. We don't know what happened to these three spirits in a previous existence, right? So we cannot judge why they are living this situation right now. But we already know. Andre, at this point of the story, doesn't know what happened and why Vicente died. Well, what was the cause of his death? Well, let me change it again. Why the pustule in his nostrils gave him so much problem? We already know that. Andre didn't. So Vicente continues to tell the story less enthusiastically, as Andre says, because he's probably having these memories to cause him a lot of pain at this very moment. After a period of pitiful troubles in the lower zones, and after he recovered in O Solar, he discovered the whole truth. When Vicente was able to return to his home, he discovered that Rosalinda and Eleuterio got married. At this very moment, the stories are very similar. Like Andre's story, once again, if you didn't read No Solar's book, I highly recommend you to go back, read No Solar's book, and then come back to read The Messengers and to listen to our discussions here. And that's what Andres says. Well, our stories are almost identical. And Vicente says, well, not really. But he said that with a smile on his face. So another surprise was there for me. Only when he returned home, he learned that he was assassinated. It was a hateful crime. That his own brother, Eleuterio, wanted to be free to marry Rosalinda, and Rosalinda was in to marry with Eleuterio. Divorce in Brazil was not legal at the time, so they couldn't actually get a divorce, and be able to marry again. So they were in love, completely in love, and they couldn't resist the temptations of the flesh, as Vicente tells us here. So what would they do? It would be really hard for Rosalinda because of how society used to work. Remember, we're talking about the 1940s and not in the United States, but in Brazil for that matter. And it would be really, really heavy for them to unmarry a brother to marry another brother. How would society see that? And that would be a very heavy burden on Rosalinda. So probably they thought, well, it would be much, much better if Vicente died. Unfortunately, they provoked Vicente's death. Right? They did something to that problem in Vicente's nose, and as Vicente puts it, that's my story in a nutshell. Not quite uncommon, right? We see this in literature all the time. If we look for it, we will find stories like this in real life. So we're not talking here about something that's just fiction. We're talking here about possibilities and about things that can happen. Unfortunately, probably happened to us in previous lives, since we were not as civilized as we are these days. And here we are, living again, having a second chance, a third chance, a fourth chance. How many times will we have to come back to fix things that we did on the past? That's a big question that's raised here. How many times have we done something, and how many times are we going to repeat the same thing, living over and over again the same mistake without paying attention to what do I really need to do? What is my duty, not only with myself, but with the ones that are with me, living together with me, be it in a family, at work, at school, anywhere. And then comes Andre with one of his very, very witty questions. And I use the word witty here because it is interesting the word that he uses. He uses criminals. It is, right? It was a crime. It was an assassination. But to me it is quite interesting that he uses criminals. If we remember in No Solar, when he was talking to his mother about the two women who were attached to his father, obsessing his father, he called those two women wicked. That was in chapter 16 of No Solar, Confidences. The question that he asks his mother is, so you helped Dad in spite of his involvement with those wicked women? That's Andre's question. He uses the word wicked, and his mother's answer is, no, don't call them that. Instead, call them our sick, ignorant, and unfortunate sisters. They too are children of our Father. I've been interceding not only on Laertes' behalf, but also on theirs, and I'm sure I have finally found a way to attract them all to my heart. That's André Luiz's mother's answer to the word wicked in André's question. Don't call them wicked. They are sick. They need help. So, coming back to the messengers, André uses the word here, criminals. To our eyes, he is not wrong. They are criminals. They just killed a man, or they killed a man. So, if they were discovered, they would be jailed. They will be held accountable. And they are going to be held accountable, that's for sure. Maybe not by men's laws, but by their own conscience when time comes. But what is Vicente's answer? André Luiz's question. And that's why I said in the beginning that this chapter is really, really important for us, because here we are seeing the difference of a spirit who already has acquired not only knowledge, but wisdom and love, to one that is still trying to conquer himself, like ourselves. Vicente, André Luiz describes here, Vicente smiled lightly and said, smiled lightly. André Luiz's mother said, no, don't call them that. And André was talking about wicked. Here he's calling them criminals. Can you see the difference? Can you see yourself? I can see myself doing the same thing as Vicente is saying, feeling the same way, and how hard it is for us to really feel and say what André Luiz's mother said to him. We are conquering ourselves. Maybe that's why André felt so attached to Vicente, so connected to him, because we are at the same level. And Vicente answers, Rosalinda and Eleuterio are apparently living together quite happily. They are dedicated materialists and are enjoying their great fortune and high social standing in a transitory world. Nothing wrong with the answer. The regular answer. So he's just describing what's happening. And that's us, at least. And hopefully I'm not talking for everybody. That's me. That's how I tend to see the world. And how much effort are we putting to see the world and to feel the world like André Luiz's mother? It is a tough call for us, but it's a call that needs to be heard, and once heard, needs to be put into practice. And we keep asking, but what about justice? André inquires here. So look, André, Vicente says, everything comes in its time, the good as well as the bad. First the seed, then the fruit. Remember when we were talking in the beginning, we need to conquer the terrain of our hearts, plant the seeds. Depending on the seeds that we are planting, those will be the fruits that we're going to harvest later on. Grapes, watermelons, guavas. There will be a lot of stuff that we can harvest. What are we planting? Noticing how sad he looked, Vicente concluded, let's not talk about this anymore. It's almost time for class. Let's attend to what's really important and help our loved ones still far away in the earthly circles. Don't be too concerned. in order to produce fruit, the tree doesn't complain about its dead leaves. For us at this time, my friend, evil is the mere result of ignorance and nothing more. He pulls us up at the end. We see the effort that he's putting into conquering himself. And hopefully, we are putting a big, big effort in doing the same, understanding that evil, the bad things that we are doing, is only because we are ignorant. Not because we're criminals, but because we are ignorant. Hopefully, not only this book, not only this program, not only these teachings, not only me, but everything that you're hearing, that you're studying, that we are listening to, are allowing ourselves to get rid of that ignorance that we still have within ourselves. And hopefully, we will be able soon enough, once we replace that ignorance for a little bit of knowledge and wisdom, to put these into practice, not only to keep them within our hearts and within our minds, but actually get out of ourselves and go meet where these teachings are needed, not to teach to others, as Aniceto said, but to work, to serve, and to be a better person, to become the living letters that he mentioned to Andre and he mentioned to us. Hopefully, we are very, very different than what we were in a previous life. I said hopefully, but what I mean is we are already very different than we were before, and we are striving to become even better people. So stick with us. Let's study together so that we can become together a power, a force for the good in the world, linked through prayers, through good actions, through good deeds, wherever we are. And once the seeds are planted, the harvest will come. Let's not be too concerned for what other people are doing. Let's be really concerned on what we are doing. I wish that we all plant very good seeds of very good fruits this next week, and that we can harvest these delicious fruits of goodness, of peace, and of love soon enough in our lives and in our world. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.